The story of the Pigeon King is the craziest and most absurd pyramid scheme that you've probably never heard of. This guy, Arlen Galbraith, built a $350 million pyramid scheme selling pigeons, which earned him the nickname Pigeon King. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how he did it and how his pigeon empire eventually fell apart. So this whole scam started back in 2001 when Arlen Galbraith founded Pigeon King International with its headquarters in Waterloo, Canada. The brilliant business idea was that Galbraith would sell breeding pigeons to farmers with a promise to buy back the pigeon babies at a fixed price. Now, at this point you might be wondering, why the would anybody want to buy pigeons? And Galbraith actually used 2 sales pitches to try and convince people that his pigeon buying and selling was actually a legitimate business. To some people, he would say that they were racing pigeons and that there was a massive lucrative market overseas where people actually pay money to watch pigeons race. Now, believe it or not, pigeon racing is actually a real thing, and some pigeons have earned hundreds of thousands of dollars over their racing careers. Galbraith even claimed that he sold racing pigeons to Mike Tyson, who is apparently a fanatic for this. But let's be real here, there's no way that pigeon racing is ever going to be mainstream. Now later on, Galbraith started claiming that these pigeons that were being bred were actually going to be sold for their meat, and that he was going to turn pigeon meat into the new chicken. I personally find it hard to believe that most people would knowingly consent to eating pigeon meat. I know that it's actually a delicacy in some places, but you will not find me eating pigeons on a regular basis. Anyways, as it turns out, Galbraith never actually sold a single pigeon, either for racing or for meat. And how the scam worked was, once he sold a breeding pair to farmers, Galbraith would come back a little while later, collect the baby pigeons, and sell those to new clients or new investors. Then he would take parts of the proceeds of that and pay off the original investors. So to keep the whole scheme running, he would have to continually be going out and finding new farmers to invest in this, to buy the pigeons that he had promised to buy back from the previous investors. Incredibly, Galbraith managed to keep this scam running for over 7 years and ended up operating in 20 US states and 5 Canadian provinces. The whole time he was running around collecting baby pigeons from one farmer, selling them off to a new farmer, and trying to build his pyramid bigger and bigger while still keeping those books balanced. And Galbraith actually did pay out a lot of people, over $30 million over the life of the scam, at $25 per baby pigeon. So some of the farmers that got in early actually made money. Of course, it was at the expense of everybody else that came afterwards. But as is the case with every pyramid scheme, it eventually has to come to an end. And things came crashing down for Galbraith and his Pigeon King empire in 2008. How did he get caught? Well, a magazine called Better Farming did an investigative piece and published an article about this pigeon scam, and eventually people caught wind. As the Pigeon King expose began making the rounds, Galbraith found it increasingly difficult to find new customers and sign them up, which of course meant that he was unable to pay off some of the earlier investors, and that's when things started to crumble. At the end, Pigeon King International had 14 barns filled with tens of thousands of pigeons that they were unable to unload because they couldn't find anybody to sign up and become a new investor. And what's crazy is that in the aftermath, when the forensic accountants were going through the books, they discovered that if Galbraith was actually able to give all of those pigeons to new clients and new investors, he would have been on the hook for $1.5 billion in actual obligations to buy back baby pigeons at $25 per pigeon. In the end though, Galbraith took $42 million from those farmers and actually walked away from obligations to buy back $350 million worth of baby pigeons, which financially destroyed and ruined the lives of many of the people that were invested. Some had even taken out loans on their farms and their houses in order to get into the pigeon breeding business, so this was just a devastating event for all of them. Also, many of those farmers were left with barns that were filled with hundreds of thousands of now useless pigeons that they had to find a way to dispose of, because you can't just open your barn doors and let hundreds of thousands of pigeons into the local area. So it did take a very long time to unwind this tangled web of lies and deceit that Galbraith had created with his Pigeon King business. Now, at this point, you might be asking, how did it take so long for people to become wise to the fact that it was a scam? And the fact is, some people actually did notice red flags and try to speak out about it. But as the scheme got bigger and more farmers started getting regular payouts, nobody wanted to believe the worst. And Galbraith continued to make every single payment on time for 7+ years until, of course, he did it. So in 2008, Galbraith was arrested in disgrace and brought to trial. Now, to make this crazy story even more ridiculous, he actually declined a defense lawyer and decided to represent himself, which extended the proceedings by years because he had no idea what the heck he was doing. And it's clear that to the very end, Galbraith was a little bit delusional because in his closing statement, he compared himself to Steve Jobs and said that he was a visionary risk taker and that all he wanted to do was to improve people's lives by introducing them to the pigeon farming business. In the end though, Galbraith was sentenced to over 7 years in prison. He did get out on parole in 2015, and now he's living out his life in some small town in Ontario, Canada. And that, folks, is the story of the Pigeon King, who created the most absurd and ridiculous pyramid scheme that I've ever come across.